Hi, I'm Judy.
And I'm Tamara.
Welcome to Balance Not Boring, the wellness podcast that's not about extremes or perfection.
Just real conversations on balancing your mind, body, and soul in our bustling city of Dubai.
So grab your tea and get comfy with us.
Oh, and fair warning, you will learn something. Welcome back to Balance Not Boring. On this episode called Back to School, the Brain and How It Impacts Self and Relationships. Today, we're incredibly honored to have someone truly special joining us. If you're a parent, a partner, a teacher, or just a human trying to understand how our brain and emotions work, this episode is for you. Our guest today is Sara, who brings a rare blend of academic depth and real-world impact to this conversation. Sara holds a double master's in science in neuroscience and psychology of mental health, and another in post-conflict development, and is the co-founder of The Wise Parent in Dubai, a parenting platform which focuses on highlighting practical tools for parents in their parenting journeys.
She's spent over 15 years working in the humanitarian field, evaluating programs for families affected by war, conflict, and trauma. And now she's channeling all of that expertise into creating a trauma-informed parenting program to help raise emotionally resilient children.
In this episode, we'll explore the brain, how self-regulation works, how gender and our past experiences shape our emotional habits, and what we can do individually and collectively to build more connected, compassionate families.
So welcome to the pod.
Oh, that's an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
We tried. But you have a lot of great things to talk about. So we're so happy you're here.
Thank you.
So let's begin with the basics.
Yeah.
What inspired you to create this program with Karen, and what makes it different?
The Wise Parent, essentially, it started when we were both pregnant. I was finishing my second master's in psychology and neuroscience of mental health, and Karen was finishing her master's in early childhood and family development. And while we were pregnant, we started geeking out, essentially, on what are the things that we can be applying for our own children, do these techniques or do these theories in psychology and neuropsychology, neurobiology, do they actually have a positive impact or even a tangible impact on our children's behavior and our children's cognitive development and well-being? And we were so fascinated by the fact that the answer is yes, actually. It really does start to show, and you can start to see a difference when you start to parent your children with that knowledge of your child's brain, of how they are developing, of your own self in your own brain while you are parenting. And we wanted to share that with the world. On a personal level, for me, it started way before The Wise Parent in the work that I actually still continue to do in the development and humanitarian sector. I've been working for 15 years, as Judy said, in this space of evaluating humanitarian programs in conflict and post-conflict settings in the Middle East. And because of that, I worked very closely or researched very closely the impact of these events on families. In the grand scheme, the development or humanitarian sector kind of has this overarching objective, which is to support societies and communities and families to transition into peace. And I always found that there was something missing with that because, okay, you can, distribute aid and you can rebuild schools and infrastructure. But if these families have gone through acute trauma and chronic continued trauma, so it's not just witnessing the devastation of war and violence and experiencing loss and grief, but it's also what comes after that, where they have lost their livelihoods, where they have lost a basic sense of normalcy, joy, the ability to feel joy. How can these people go back to peace? And for us, it's really about, with The Wise Parent, it was, if we want to support the future generations, and if we want as a collective to kind of achieve conscious awareness and elevate ourselves in a way where we are more peaceful, where we are more integrated socially and understanding, then the parents are the key to that. because the parents are the ones that are raising the future generation. So we wanted to really support the parent with the right skills and knowledge and education so that they can support their children in growing up in this more kind of
I think there is a shift,
positive
like,
way.
globally, everyone's starting to be more mindful just of themselves, whether a parent or not, just how I'm talking to people, how I'm reacting, like
Yeah.
taking an extra second to learn about themselves. Like it's a woke
Yeah.
era now. Like it's nice though to be present and kind of to like look back on your actions versus just coast through life and not really know if you're growing, how you're evolving, how you're affecting others. And it all starts in the brain, how your mind works. And that's what I'm curious about, and why the brain? What drew you to study neuroscience?
So, I mean, on a personal level, I've always been interested in science. That was my forte in school. But while working in the region and being from the region, I became deeply curious about our behaviors from a cultural standpoint. Like when you kind of see that you can almost culturally stereotype people from our region or from any other region based on, the way that they behave. And then you can look at the past and the history, not so far history for us, unfortunately, to kind of start to connect the dots between the behavior and what's happened in the past. And so for me, it was a curiosity of, okay, the brain is different and it's impacted by these events. It's our brains wire based on not just nature, but also nurture, which means our experiences. And that's really what kind of got me into neuroscience and psychology.
That's really interesting. So let's say most of us who haven't studied science, neuroscience, any of that, don't know anything about the brain. Walk us through what someone can learn about if they're learning about themselves and emotions and how to kind of self-regulate. What would they want to know about the brain and how it's built out?
So luckily, we have some really good neurobiologists and neuropsychologists that have almost kind of turned it into pop psychology. They've figured out a way of explaining it in a very easy layman way. I'm going to refer to Dr. Dan Siegel, Dr. Tina Payne Brierson, who are kind of one of the forefront figures when it comes to explaining this in a very simplistic way. So the brain essentially has 3 levels. And we can understand that as the lower level, the middle level, and the upper level. The lower level is the brainstem. And that is the part that is essentially where our neck is, and it connects to our spinal cord and to our nervous system and to our body. The brainstem is the thing that is the most evolved in us as humans. The brainstem is responsible for kind of all of our physiological responses, so our heart rate, our blood pressure, and all of our physical needs. And it connects with our body. So it gets us to move and react based on the signals that we're getting from the rest of our brain. Then we have the middle part, the middle floor. And that is the feeling brain. And that contains the amygdala and the hippocampus. What it means when we say feeling brain is that this is the part of the brain where we have most of our emotions. It's the emotional center of our brain. If our brainstem was the part of the body that were to say, I feel, the feelings brain is what those feelings actually mean. It's the interpretation of the emotions. And that's why when we have the amygdala is the emotional part, and then we have the hippocampus, which is the memory part. So interestingly enough, if I were to ask you, recall a memory, any memory in your past, it is very, very unlikely that you will be able to recall a memory without having an emotion attached to it. We need our emotions in order to record memories. So the hippocampus is like the filing cabinet, and the amygdala is the emotional part. And then the upper brain is the cortical region. This is the thinking brain. This is the part of the brain that is all about logic, problem solving, flexible thinking, empathy. And it's called the executive functions or the thinking brain because this is a much more elevated kind of upper level processing in our brain. And when we are younger, so in the early years, the upper part of the brain is not developed at all. we might have the structure that exists there, but all of the wiring and connectivity is not developed. It doesn't start developing until around the age of 4 or 5.
I want you to quiz me, when does the frontal cortex get developed?
Oh, you're so cute.
And I remember this because I did take the Wise Parent, just disclaimer, and I loved it when I was pregnant. When my daughter was 1.5 years. But anyways, I know the answer. Tell me if I'm still right. It's 25, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so imagine, like, that's your logic, right? The
Yeah.
frontal cortex is like just risk, assessing risk and logic and all of that.
Does the emotional brain have phases? Like, I know, for example, my niece started nursery, first day of school today, had a complete meltdown, naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But are there phases to emotional growth, or is it that you have no, you're emotionally immature, of course, and then you're then mature?
Mm-hmm.
Does it work like that, or?
Kind of. Yes and no. Yes. I'm going to say just yes, because we have, the debate of always nature versus nurture, it doesn't exist. It's nature and nurture. So from a biological standpoint, yes, while the child is developing, they will have more abilities to cognitively kind of to reach from the emotional part to the thinking part, to the upper part. That means the ability to regulate. So when we're young, we are mostly in the amygdala. We are mostly in the emotional part. That's why emotions kind of explode out of us. And then we learn how to regulate those emotions. We gain more access to the thinking part, to the cortical parts, to the neo and prefrontal cortex. But we also need someone to teach us that. We need a parent or an adult, a teacher, a caregiver to teach us how to regulate those emotions. They don't come naturally. The only thing that we're really born with naturally is our brainstem and the feelings part, the amygdala. Those parts know how to, they're very highly connected. They're very dense from a neuron perspective. There's a lot of connectivity and synapses. And so those fire a lot.
Yeah, so that might, like, learning that information of how your kids, they don't develop that kind of logic standpoint until much later in life. They kind of operate from emotions. That would help a parent, I can imagine. I mean, myself, I give them more grace. Like, okay, they don't even have the tools to self-regulate if they have these tantrums. Adults, you would expect, okay, like, you're an adult, get it together. You can't just have a tantrum in a restaurant. But kids maybe don't have the ability.
Definitely.
Their brain isn't there yet.
Definitely. And I think that this is something that's very helpful for parents to understand, because we hear a lot in our work, this belief almost that their kid is doing it with intention, that their kid is doing it to disrespect the parent, if they have a tantrum or if they're not listening, or if they're not kind of complying or cooperating with what the parent is asking of them, that the parent kind of perceives that as almost kind of like a malicious intent. And children just don't have that. We know that from a biological standpoint, it's not on purpose. It's because they cannot regulate in the way that we expect them to.
And are boys and girls different in the way that they regulate their emotions?
The research, and when we say boy and girls, I just have to say that this is about sex, not gender. From what that means is from a biological perspective, absolutely there is a difference. There is a difference hormonally, there's a difference neurostructurally in their brains. What's fascinating is that the left part of the brain is the side of the brain that is more about linguistic, it's linear, logical, it's the lawyer, okay? And the right side of the brain is the more creative, flowy, artistic, sporty, athlete side of the brain. So girls have that bridge that connect both sides. And that is why we see girls have the ability to experience emotions and then talk about their emotions a bit easier than boys. Boys, the corpus callosum is not as well developed in the early years. And that happens because of what we were discussing before the show about this thing called testosterone washing during the 3rd trimester. And testosterone washing essentially we don't really understand why this happens, but it slows down the neurodevelopment of boys. And this is why we see in the early years differences in the ability to emotionally regulate between boys and girls. That being said, culture and the way that we socialize children plays a really big impact on whether we can close that gap or keep it wide open.
Do you think part of it is just, like you said, social normalization of how men should bottle up their emotions? So really, if we didn't have that from hundreds of years, thousands of years, they could just express the way women would. It's not a science thing. It's more of a social thing.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, socialization and culture play a very big part. And I think that this culture of, boys don't feel, and you shouldn't show your emotions, or you shouldn't feel sad, and girls shouldn't show their anger. If a child goes through several kind of repeated kind of signals in their upbringing of, I shouldn't show sadness, I shouldn't show sadness, I shouldn't show sadness, what that does is it starts to impact the way that the brain wires up, where sadness becomes something that is perceived as bad or negative or dangerous or not good for him.
It's vulnerable.
And the problem with that is that then, if we don't teach these children how to regulate those emotions, how to feel them in order to regulate, you have to feel them first in order to then know what to do with them, right? And if we don't teach them how to do that, then connecting from that feelings brain up to the thinking brain, the wiring is less dense. It becomes more dense in the lower part rather than the upper part.
How are we doing in this part of the world in terms of raising kids and bridging that gap together? Do you think it's changed from many years ago? I'm versing it towards, the way that I see it is we look at the West for the way they raise their children versus here. So how do you see the difference?
I think that it's difficult to compare in that lens because education plays a really big part. And for our part of the world, there's a big divide between, societies or communities that have that education, have that awareness, and those that don't. When you have that education, it's very hard to kind of come back from that. It's very hard to kind of know what you know and then not adjust a little bit the way that you parent. That being said, we still have, which the West doesn't have, very recent trauma that is still active, actually. And that plays a very big part.
The way I see it is like the norms, the previous generation, like boomers and even older than that, I feel like it was a norm to keep, emotions in to save face, especially in these kind of more collectivistic cultures on the East and whatever. It's kind of like you don't want to make a big drama. Let's just hold it in. Let's not always kind of show our cards to other people. Yeah. If you're upset about something, whatever. So saving face when you hold and bottle things in, this is how the norm was. So if you're going to parent your kids to do the same way, like our parents' generation, that was generally what they did. It's hard to break that cycle. And it's amazing work that you're doing in Wise Parent, because as parents taking this course, we grew up mostly, I'm not saying everyone, but we weren't taught to like really dive in our feelings in the Middle East. Let's be honest. Like, it's kind of like, yes, no, enough is enough, Of course, there was some patience with us, but not like to the way that we're doing it now. We probe our kids. We're teaching them ways to self-regulate on their own. All of that was stuff, it's new to me. So it's hard as parents, like in our generation as millennials, to learn new tools, because in a way we have to reparent some of ourselves. Mm-hmm. As great of a job our parents did with what they knew, we're learning new things. So we have to learn, and then we have to pass that down. So what are some ways that we can kind of like relearn the way our brains work, reparent ourselves in the ways that we wish we could have kind of known as kids, to teach our kids, what to do and how to live their lives in a more emotionally aware way?
I guess, yeah, it is a wake-up call. I think that the first step is always to have an awareness of yourself. And it sounds easier said than done, I know. But when I was talking about the brain and the different levels, I can actually reduce it and simplify it even more when it comes to kind of self-regulating. We can have the green zone, which is the zone of the brain where you're fully integrated, you're flowing, you're connected. Your brain is saying, I feel safe, I feel seen, I feel understood. That is the green zone. And then you have the red zone. And the red zone, just as it sounds, it's the part where it's when your nervous system is in a space where it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel connected. And when we are in the red zone, what happens is we actually lose blood supply to the upper part of our brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for problem solving, thinking critically, logically, flexibly, empathetically. So we lose all of that when we are in the red zone. So if you think about as a parent or as any, even if you're not a parent, when you start to identify when you are in the red zone, you can start to apply strategies of, okay, I'm in the red zone. I actually need to step away from this situation, right? Because when we are in the red zone, we are detached from who we are authentically speaking. If
You're in survival mode, essentially.
you are in survival mode, so you are no longer authentically yourself, right? If you could remember like being in the red zone and saying things you didn't mean to say or doing things you didn't mean to do, yeah? Because you're no longer yourself. It's not you. Your authenticity has been hijacked by the lower part of your brain because it's detected a threat and now it's responsible for survival because we are wired for survival. So the lower part of the brain, which is, the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, that takes over because that is more important than kind of intellectualizing a situation.
So like you taught us in the course, I remember even for kids, like if your kid is in that red zone having like a reactive fit, like tantrum, it's because they feel like they're in the survival mode, even though you're thinking it's such a small problem. Their brain can't handle, so they react in a big way. So you taught us, don't even waste your time speaking logic with them. Wait till it's over, let them feel safe with you, hug them, stand with them, take them to a safe area. Then when they calm down, replay the scenario and talk about what could go differently. So that's what I remember. And I even apply it with adults. Like if you're, let's say, with your spouse, with a sister, with your parent, if somebody's really just aggravated or let's say triggered, what's the point? Like let them calm down, give them some space, and then let's go back and discuss what happened.
In the moment, so we love to distinguish between in the moment and outside the moment. In the moment, there's not much that can be done. I think that parents or even if you're not a parent, like you think that you're gonna be this like kind of like Zen Buddha master in these moments, and you're gonna come up with all the and you're gonna take these big deep breaths and and start humming and meditating. No, that's not what happens. In the moment, do what you need to do to get yourself back to calm. And because of mirror neurons, children will learn from you. So if you, in the most difficult moments, are still able to appear calm, you don't even have to really be calm. But if you can show calmness and compassion on the outside to your children, they will start to mimic that in these difficult moments. Are they understanding on a cognitive level? No, but they are recording it somatically. They are feeling it in their body because children, remember, are mostly in the feeling brain. So they are like sponges and they are feeling and recording those feelings on a cellular level. There is a lot more pressure to do things right. We feel that. And I think that it's really important to pass on a message consistently to parents is that there's no such thing as perfection. And we cannot be perfect. We cannot be parenting it exactly the way we want to in every single moment. Children need to see us make mistakes. It's more about verbalizing those mistakes out loud in front of them so that they can see that, yeah, we're not always going to parent in the best way. Where you can say to your kid, you know what? I'm in a really bad mood and I'm not being the best version of myself. And it's not on you. I think the difference is that from past generations is that we're actually trying to encourage parents to communicate that with their kids, to say that this isn't your fault. This is on me. I'm having a hard time. I'm going through something stressful and I need to figure out how to regulate myself.
Yeah, there's times we react more than we'd like to. Like we raise our voice or we're snappy or we don't have that patience we would normally try to embody for the child. But I think the difference is now trying to be open and transparent. Like it's not a weakness as an older person, as the adult, to tell your child, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Like
let's embrace that. It's vulnerable, but it teaches your kid also that they can apologize to their friends. It's okay to apologize to their sibling if they push them in an angry moment. Apologizing is okay. Just because we're older doesn't mean we can't. Yeah. And that's the difference, I think, with previous generations.
How can then, as an adult, a parent, a guardian, partner, how can adults in that sense begin healing from any of those past traumas. Because I know that at least for me, in certain situations, I look back and I'm like, oh, that's how my dad reacted. Okay. And it could be great. It could not. So how can like parents start to rewire, I guess, if rewiring is the right word, their brain to approach things differently?
So we know it's not 100%, but we can see from someone's behavior how they react to certain situations, to triggers. We can see in what part of the brain did they mostly spend their childhood in, or in what part of the brain was developed more than others. So if we see people, even in ourselves, if we find ourselves being very defensive in situations that may not need that much defensiveness, our perceptions of people and relationships and situations is different from the norm, where perhaps we're more hyper vigilant of people's moods. These are all indications that, okay, this person in their childhood would have spent more time in the lower part, in the survival part of their brain, because they needed to. And what ends up happening is that when you get older, that does repeat itself from a biological perspective, but also from a psychology kind of behavioral perspective. Because as you said, if you start to say like, oh my God, I'm doing that thing that my mom used to do that I thought I would never do, where let's say like you snap. And the reason for that is because you mirrored the way that your parent used to respond to these situations. So how do we heal from that? You actually heal from the bottom up. You cannot access this part of the brain, the upper part of the brain, before you first heal the lower part of the brain. And so we need to wire up. There's actually something in neuroscience called pruning. And that is when we start to lose the neurons that we don't use as much. And there's something called neurogenesis, where you start to create more neurons the more that you learn and do something.
Fire and wire, right?
Exactly. Fire and wire.
I know. I'm a nerd.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we need to do in order to heal is actually to bring awareness to these things that we're doing that we don't want to be doing anymore, that are no longer serving us. And it could be things like physical reactions. It could be mental reactions, like where we start going into negative thought patterns, black and white thinking, anxious thoughts, intrusive thoughts, all of these things. When we catch them and we try to shift our behaviors, then it means that we're using those neural connections that we formed less and less. This is the idea behind neuroplasticity. This is the idea between healing from trauma or traumatic experiences or learning from your past. What you end up doing when you bring more consciousness to these thought patterns, let's say, what you're actually doing is you're now activating your upper part of the brain. The automatic thoughts, the automatic behaviors, the autopilot, your subconscious, that's the lower part. If you bring more conscious, this is why in a lot of healing work, you talk about meditation, you talk about yoga, somatic healing, where you do the tapping or movements. This all works because you are bringing more awareness to your body, more awareness to your thoughts, and therefore you are wiring up instead of wiring down.
Talk to us about, I know in The Wise Parent you made us do this, so I remember it really well because it made me emotional. Talk about inner child meditations or healing. What does that do to the brain in terms of this fire and wiring? Like, how can you change that in terms of your past traumas and everything?
Early childhood traumas, you can call these child wounds. They could be physical, like when we have wounds, they're physical. You can literally see a scar, or they're emotional on the inside. And those are difficult to see. Usually emotional wounds are related to attachment. Attachment means the proximity that you have with a caregiver, feeling loved, feeling seen, attuned by your parent. So your parent understands you, connects with you. And children that have emotional wounds, when they grow up, it manifests in so many different ways, in relationally, professionally, emotionally, cognitively. And the inner child meditation is all about going back to your childhood, seeing yourself as a kid and giving yourself the things that you didn't receive that you needed as a child. Did you need to feel more loved? Did you need to feel more seen, more understood? So you go back to these moments and you actually visualize yourself as an adult, yourself as the parent, giving your child self the love and attention and the things that you needed as a kid. So you are healing yourself. You are being the parent or the caregiver that you needed in those moments and kind of closing the loop in that way. And visualizing it is extremely powerful because there's research that talks about how when we close our eyes and we do these kind of visual meditations, our subconscious doesn't really know the difference between what's real and what's not. And so you're almost rewiring in that way where you kind of, you're recording a new memory to replace those old ones. This is what we're all about. The Wise Parent is about teaching parents how to support their kids at home to learn these skills. For us, these are skills. If we want to kind of like strip things down to the basics of modern day parenting and kind of distinguish ourselves from, traditional parenting, modern day parenting is all about allowing expression, allowing emotion, validating our children, allowing themselves to be their true, authentic selves, right? But with that comes a lot of feeling and a lot of, outbursts and a lot more behaviors. And this is why we hear our parents saying, you never did that when you were a kid. I would have never allowed that. How could you let your kid do that? Like those kind of comments, because today we are allowing our kids to do that. The difference is that we didn't behave in those ways. It was more strict. There was more punitive, threatening, scary, like obey me or else kind of parent. So today, when we're allowing all these emotions, it doesn't mean that we also don't want our kids running rampant with their emotions. That's also not good. I really, really want to put a red flag on parents that just think that modern day parenting is about validating their kids' emotions. It's not just about validating. Yes, validate. Yes, but also teach them the skills on how to regulate those emotions, because otherwise it can get really overwhelming. If we start going too much in the right brain, which is the emotions, the feelings part, the body part of the brain, it can get very chaotic. It can get very overwhelming and children can get flooded. What do I do? What do I do with these feelings that are swirling all inside me? So we need to integrate with the left brain. We need to connect with the upper part. We do that by, as Judy mentioned, one of the things that we love to do is role modeling. We role model how to regulate our own emotions. It can be real emotions or it can be fake. You can be a Broadway actress and totally act out a scenario. I do it all the time. You can do it through role playing with them, like through games and play. Children learn through play. Up until the age of 10, play is the primary way that children learn how to process their emotions and their experiences. Play therapy is a huge thing. You can teach them skills through play, how to regulate with their little dollies. I'm angry. What do you do with that anger? What do you? So you can, yeah. Sorry, I'm like
that's
rambling.
interesting. No, not at all.
Interesting.
But just to summarize everything you've said, for adults with or without kids, it's so important, I think, learning from what you were saying, to learn about the brain. Just because if you do want to learn about yourself and how you can better regulate, how that affects your relationships, how can you improve on those relationships, it's all about how you can learn about yourself, what works best for you in terms of calming down techniques. If you really learn about okay, you know what, I need 5 minutes alone, then we can come back and talk through this issue, rather than get in reactivity mode and it just goes in spirals. So when you actually learn about how your brain works, I really believe it helps you to kind of be your best self. And so it's really important hopefully for our listeners to take that away, is you don't need a parent to be a parent to really care to relearn and rewire yourself. But just to learn about your brain enough is already that's why I do this. You give yourself more grace in that sense.
Yes.
It's not why am I like this? Why was I born like this? Well, this is actually why. Look at science. All of us have these tendencies, right? But nature and nurture kind of plays on why you are the way you are. But it's also never too late. You can also rewire yourself. I think on that note, we should end with a rapid fire.
Oh, God.
I know it's your favorite thing to do,
okay.
but
It doesn't
it's a great
have to
way.
be one word.
Yes. It's a great way for people to get to know you a little bit more and, So the first question is, what is the best way to reset your nervous system in 30 seconds?
To reset your nervous system, I think that the most important thing is to first realize what your nervous system is doing. So just very simply, green zone, red zone.
Mhm.
If I'm in the red zone, I need to, for me personally, I need to take space. And if I can't physically take space, then I'll put my headphones in and tune out the noise until I'm able to regulate.
Got it.
Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? What's your default?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of fight and it's a bit of freeze. It depends. If someone's in my face, I'm fighting. But if I'm caught off
Don't
guard,
mess.
I'm freezing.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation.
Yeah. So for me, one of the most interesting things about the brain is the impact of cortisol. I think it's interesting because we live in a very high stress society. Short spurts of cortisol is something that we need in order to learn, and it's actually something positive. Chronic stress, prolonged cortisol actually kills neurons in the brain, and it goes for the critical part of the neo and prefrontal cortex. And so when we are chronically stressed, it starts killing the neurons in the part of the brain that we need in order to be able to be more rational, to be more problem solving and logical and empathetic. So I think that that's really interesting because I think we really undermine the impact of stress. We know the impact of it on the body, but I think it's not spoken enough on the impact of it on our brains.
One doctor on that note that I really, admire and respect, Dr. Amen, you know him. Like he's always trying to shed light on how the brain works and how it's so important to learn about it because there's so much that we don't understand, like the effects of our actions every day. It's like because we don't see the brain, it's so easily overlooked, right?
Isn't it
It's like a
true?
muscle. You need to like heal it in some way.
Isn't it true we only tap into like 7 or 11% of the brain?
I think that was Einstein. I think we're 5,
I think we're
right?
Yeah, I think Einstein's 11.
I'm not quite sure. I know it's quite low.
But it's so minimal
Yeah.
compared to, like, I mean, if you're taking 100% and we're only
Yeah.
using, say, 5%,
Yeah.
that's so small compared to.
And then we're killing what we have off with the stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the emotional superpower you aren't using enough?
I would say repair. Repair is something that is not utilized enough, and it is incredibly powerful. One, because I like to see human interaction is we are relational species, and we are very cyclical in the way that we relate to each other. So we have a cycle of connection, and then we rupture that connection, and then we need to repair that connection. Without the repair, we just have a lot of ruptures that keep repeating. And so what I would say is that the emotional superpower is actually to close that loop by repairing, being accountable, acknowledging where your vulnerabilities are, where your weaknesses are, where your mistakes are. And communicating that to the people that matter most to you.
What's one thing your brain needs daily besides sleep?
Joy. We learn best and we feel our most authentic, connected self when we feel safe. And a big part of feeling safe is feeling joy, being playful. Finding that in your daily life is super regenerative for the brain and for your well-being.
It's healthy.
And lastly, a moment in your life that rewired your thinking.
I think becoming a parent. Yeah, that's the obvious answer,
I
right?
agree
That was
with
easy.
you.
That was like cheating.
Yeah, I think on a physical and spiritual level, everything. Like being a
Yeah.
parent, is it true? Can you confirm for us? Like, I think I mentioned it. I did read somewhere that it's like the final growth spurt of the brain. When you become a parent, it kind of molds into something new. Because even like your gray matter shrinks and other parts of your brain like expands so that you can be a parent. So doesn't that change how you think, the rewiring in a way?
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't say it better than that.
Okay,
Well done.
I tried. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us so much to think about from a science perspective, from the heart and the hope. For our listeners, how can they also reach you if they want to learn more about the brain and just being a parent in general?
They can reach us we're very, very responsive on Instagram. Our handle is The Wise Parent. Also our website or email info@thewiseparent.org.
Nice.
We'll link all those on the show notes.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Super, super educational.
Thank you.